Today we're talking about some of the issues that former Mormons go through when they're leaving the church, and in particular, we want to talk about maybe how we handle our relationships. Sometimes we can come across without much tact, and we can come across maybe a little bit too strong, or attitudes are out of whack. Well, let's explore that together. I'm talking today with Tracy Tennant, and she addresses this in her book called Confessions of an Ex-Mormon. And it's really a great book for people who are transitioning out of Mormonism. And so, Tracy, maybe you can reflect with us a little bit about why it's hard for people coming out of Mormonism to speak and act with more sensitivity, with more tact.
It's hard because you feel betrayed. You're outraged. You're outraged that you've not only been duped, but you feel like you've been lied to, maybe not by the your family, of course, or your local leaders, but
the
from
church.
The church, exactly. And you don't feel any respect for it at all. But that tends to translate, unfortunately, down into not having or showing respect to your still believing relatives.
Right.
It's kind of hard to separate that. Here's this organization that I have absolutely no respect for, and then you bring that down into your personal relationships, and that's something, a pitfall that you really need to avoid.
Yeah. So what might that look like in those relationships? How have you seen other people maybe cross the line there?
The terminology that we use. I mean, we're anxious for a lot of reasons to show our loved ones, hey, this church is not what it claims to be.
Right.
So it's easy for us to, instead of revering the prophet Joseph Smith. Now we're not talking about him in terms as a prophet.
Right.
So we tell our relatives who have asked, well, why did you leave the church or whatever? And then, oh yeah, would you believe it, Joe Smith, and he married, out of his however many wives, 11 of them were married to other men. I wonder what they were doing. And just coming across poking fun at whether it's the temple or the temple ceremony, and then you instead of talking about these things in hushed and respectful tones, all of a sudden you're throwing all this stuff out there, and you're not doing it because you want to hurt people or you want to just shove whatever in their face. You're hoping that if you can just show them what the facts are, that maybe their eyes will be open too. Right,
and maybe and because they're so locked in their ways, sometimes you feel like I've got to jar them out of their complacency or something,
Right.
Yeah.
And then part of it too, you feel like, at least I felt like this, if I was talking in reverential tones about, even if I'm telling a truth about, the temple ceremony being very similar to the Masonic temple rites, if I talk about these in these quiet, hushed tones, then it's almost like I'm validating Mormonism or giving legitimacy to it. And so if I just talk about it a little, maybe with a little bit of contempt in there, then I'm saying, look, it's not true.
Right. Right, so you don't want to, like if you talk about the apostles by using their middle initial, right? No, I just want to talk about Tommy, so because you don't want to make it feel like that you really think that there's legitimacy there. So it's easy to go too far the other way, right?
Right. I remember telling my son, this was just a few years back, he was still borderline Mormon, maybe leaving, but still hoping that it's true. And one day I had referred to Bob Millett, Robert Millett. I said, well, Bob Millett says XYZ, and my son he was really offended. He said, oh, so you just call him Bob? And I was like, well, no, he actually goes by Bob.
His friends call him Bob.
His friends call him Bob. I saw him on YouTube in this interview, and they were calling him Bob. And then my son kind of backed off. Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it felt to him disrespectful and untactful. So then how can I maybe be more aware of that? What are some boundaries I can set maybe to be a little more careful about that?
Just watch there's a couple things. First of all, check your heart.
Yeah.
And make sure that you are trying to convey these truths to the other person out of a concern for their soul, for their well-being.
And not out of my bitterness or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other thing to remember is, look, you're talking about, it's like talking about somebody's mother to
That's
that
true,
person.
because of the emotional connection to the church, yeah.
Right, yeah. So you just want to talk in terms that are respectful. If you're going to talk about some of the things that Joseph Smith did, or that don't line up with the Bible, or that maybe might not have been ethical, just don't refer to him as old Joe Smith or that hooligan or no good so-and-so.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
Be careful. So you're asking people to be a little more mature in how they handle, and yet as we leave the church, a lot of times the LDS, some LDS people at least, are going to not necessarily treat us with maturity.
Right.
They'll attack, they'll gossip behind our back, whatever. Why do I have to be the one who's more mature?
That's that is the hard thing. You're going through all this turmoil. People don't understand you. You've been accused of who knows what. Your character has been attacked, your integrity. And now all of a sudden, you're the one who has to be mature. You're the one who has to not offend anybody. Nobody has any issues offending me, but I've got to be the one to hold out the olive branch. And it's really hard. But you've got to ask yourself, as you're making that transition, especially if first of all, family is important. Right. Relationships are important.
Right. It's worth maintaining those relationships.
They just are. Whether Mormonism is true or not, there are family ties there, and family is important.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that if you do still believe in God, if you do claim to be a follower of the Lord and Savior Jesus, as a disciple, you need to realize that the people you're talking to are lost. And I heard this analogy one time. If a blind man, walks into a room and stumbles over a chair, are you going to kick the guy and say, "Well, you idiot,"
blame him,
and blame him for stumbling over something that he didn't see?
Yeah.
Well, no, of course not. You're going to show compassion. You're going to help him up off the floor. You're going to say, "Well, here, when you enter this room, it's so many steps between the door and whatever it is." Your friends and family who are still LDS, they haven't seen the truth of the everlasting gospel from the Bible, and you need to show compassion toward them. Just keep in sight, even through all the personal attacks that are going on against you, you need to keep in sight the end goal, which is to bring them out of darkness into the light.
Right, that's a great point. So I hope this is encouraging to you. Maybe you've stumbled in this area a little bit. Well, it's not too late to change and to work on a better response to your family and your friends. You'll learn. I encourage you that part of that might be to get in community with other people who are honoring Jesus that can help support and encourage you. Check out our other resources. There's some links below to some other related topics. And we trust that God's working in your life and that you're going to become the kind of person that He's calling you to be. So thanks for watching today.